The sudden, silent SOS on a phone screen is more than a technical failure, it is a rupture in the collective persona. Tens of thousands found themselves severed from the network of voices and data that constitutes modern social reality. This matters because that persona, our adapted, functioning social self, is not a given. It is a fragile construct built atop invisible collective infrastructures. When Verizon's nationwide network collapsed, it did not just disrupt calls, it forced a sudden, involuntary confrontation with the solitude that lies beneath our connected lives. This immediate personal disconnection exposes a core psychological mechanism. The persona depends on external systems to mediate our place in the collective. Its abrupt collapse creates a vacuum, a moment of psychic regression, where the individual, cut off from the sustaining flow of social validation and information, can feel a primitive anxiety. The FCC's concern over impacts on emergency calls concretizes this, showing how a failure in a commercial system instantly becomes a public safety crisis, revealing our profound dependence. The stakes are this immediate personal dislocation, a shock to the adapted self. But such ruptures are never isolated. What historical and situational patterns does this event illuminate when we widen our view? This technological failure did not occur in a vacuum. Notice what's the same in each case. On the same day the network failed, major U.S. stock indexes declined, pressured by disappointing bank reports, and commodities like gold and silver reached record levels, a classic signal of market anxiety. Simultaneously, large-scale anti-government protests continue in Iran, with rights groups reporting significant casualties. These are not random, isolated fractures. They are synchronized disturbances in the collective order. The collective psyche is not a metaphor, it is the psychological foundation shared by a society, its common mental function. A disruption in one of its primary connecting systems, like the telecommunications network that mediates our daily consciousness, does not merely cause inconvenience, it resonates, it amplifies the latent tensions already present in other spheres, the economic uncertainty that drives investors toward gold, the political unrest that erupts into street protests. The fragility of our external systems mirrors the inherent instability of the collective psyche itself. When these synchronized ruptures occur, we are observing a fundamental pattern. The personal disorientation of a lost signal is a minute reflection of a larger collective disorientation. What core psychological forces, then, explain this capacity for resonance? The Federal Communications Commission will review the outage's impact on public safety communications, a fact that directly underscores how the failure of a connective system reveals its vital function only in its absence. This is the pattern. The libido, as the energy that seeks connection and expression, flows through these technological channels. When blocked, that energy regresses, manifesting as collective anxiety. We see this same dynamic in the diplomatic discussions between U.S. and Iranian officials amid ongoing protests. Here, the libido for political expression and change, when met with violent suppression, regresses into heightened geopolitical tension and a flight towards safer assets like gold. Consider the personal mechanism, the compulsive checking of a silent phone. This is the individual experience of a libidinal block, a small-scale regression where seeking connection turns into anxious repetition. The system's fragility mirrors the fragility of our collective psyche, where a rupture in one arena amplifies disturbances in others. The stakes are the stability of the shared reality we construct through these connections. How, then, do we interpret the simultaneous market declines and civil unrest? The Verizon outage, which severed tens of thousands from communication, and the state-imposed internet blackout in Iran, which suppresses verification of reported casualties, are not merely technical or political events. They are failures of mediation. Notice the pattern. In each case, the structure that should connect the individual to the collective, the network, the public sphere, collapses or is weaponized. This precipitates a collective regression. When the mediating channel fails, the libido, the energy for connection and adaptation, cannot flow forward into shared understanding or coordinated action. It regresses, turning inward and backward into more primitive, anxious, or conflictual states. The markets retreat into safe commodities like gold, and the geopolitical tension marked by a U.S. president's promise of help are manifestations of this. The system's fragility reveals the psyche's fragility. If this feels abstract, here is the concrete danger. When communication fails, the individual is thrown back upon unmediated instinct and rumor, and the collective loses its capacity for a reasoned response. The result is not superior awakening, but destabilization, seen in both internal market anxieties and external violent clashes. The power dynamic is clear. Control the medium, and you manipulate the regression. However, a purely psychological reading meets a limit here. It cannot, from its own principles, verify the specific casualty count from Iran or fully account for the engineering specifics of the outage. These remain in the realm of reported facts and material causes. The concept shows us the pattern of collapse, but not the singular historical truth. This forces a question. Where does the interpretation of meaning end and the acknowledgement of brute fact begin? A purely psychological interpretation, however, can only take us so far. It can reveal the meaning of a phenomenon, but it cannot account for its engineering cause or its strategic purpose. The Verizon outage was a technical failure in physical infrastructure. The Iranian state's imposition of an internet blackout is a political strategy. My method analyzes the psychic reality these events create, the anxiety of the individual cut off, the collective frustration of a populace silenced, but it does not diagnose the router or decipher the diplomatic cable. To confuse the interpretation of an effect with the explanation of its cause is a fundamental error. This is the limit. When markets signal caution, with gold reaching a record as stocks slip, we see a collective psychological state materialize, yet we cannot reduce the disappointing bank reports that contributed to the decline to mere symptoms of a mood. They are concrete financial results. The pattern, however, is what matters for understanding our condition. If we persistently misread strategic or mechanical ruptures only as psychological symbols, we cede our agency, trading sober assessment for comforting overarching narratives. The confluence of these events on a single day, January 14, presents a stark phenomenology of disconnection. The question that remains is what we are to make of this shared fragility. Our demand for connection is ceaseless, yet the systems we build to satisfy it are inherently fragile. When Verizon's network failed, tens of thousands found their phones inert, severing the most basic links to work, family, and emergency services. This is not merely a technical fault, it is a rupture in the collective persona, the mask of seamless social functioning we all wear. The immediate consequence was a signal of systemic vulnerability, which the FCC must now review for public safety. But the deeper, psychic consequence is an amplification of latent anxiety. We see this in the parallel disruption in Iran, where an internet blackout imposed by the state seeks to stifle the collective voice of protest, making verification of casualties and events nearly impossible. In both cases, a break in communication channels does not create tension, but exposes and intensifies what already exists. Here, market unease and geopolitical strife; there, a violent struggle for autonomy. If we ignore this signal, if we treat such outages as mere inconveniences to be fixed, rather than symptoms of a collective psyche under strain, we risk a more profound dissociation. The individual, forced back into isolation, may project their frustration outward, blaming external systems or groups, rather than confronting the inherent peril of our interdependence. The behavioral takeaway is to observe, tomorrow, where your own sense of stability relies on a fragile external scaffold. Notice the quiet panic when a screen goes dark, and question what that dependence masks. The personal quest for fulfillment now navigates a landscape of necessary yet perilous connections.